right. Standing rock. All right, America, marijuana community in general. We have a situation on our hands here. It appears that Donald Trump has done the unthinkable and hired probably one of the nuttiest professors in the game for his attorney general. Now we're talking about Jeff Sessions here, and if you don't know who Jeff Sessions is, you must not have. You could have the excuse that you're not very old. All right, if you're 45 years old like I am, you should have heard of Jeff Sessions by now. He's an infamous Republican, just right wing. Let's face it, far right Christian guy that enforces morality basically, and he's opposed to immigration in general, but what it comes down to is he's downright racist. He has made comments before that you'll hear in a minute that disqualify him, in my opinion, from having a position in the White House, but let alone top cop. But what it really does is it worries people in the marijuana community, because we've came a long ways here in the last 20 years, 20, 30 years on marijuana decriminalization. There's over 25 states that have decriminalized marijuana, and there's hundreds of local municipalities that have decriminalized marijuana. Entire states deprioritizing marijuana, as in making felonies misdemeanors and misdemeanors not even tickets. There's a lot of that going on. And then there's legalization of medical marijuana, which, as you may know, more than half of the country was already, or more than half of the country now is a medical marijuana state, with new states enacting laws within the next 2 years. So, of course, their laws are already passed. They just have to actually do all the hard work of actually enacting the laws, which, as we've seen, can be very slow. And the reason they're very slow is because there's always people in the way trying to slow it down. And that might be the biggest concern here with this Jeff Sessions. The most legitimate concern, in my opinion, is that if anything, he could definitely slow the progress that we've made down. He could theoretically stop all progress and go a different direction. We might think about talking about that. And then finally we have the recreational marijuana. Now, recreational marijuana is now legal in I believe it's 8 states. You had the original 5, and then 4 more just passed. So that would be 9. Well, 5 it was plus DC. So 4 states plus DC. And then you have the new 4 states. So you have 8 states plus DC that have recreational marijuana. When you're talking about California, that is one of the biggest population centers in the country, obviously. And you combine that with basically all the other 7 states in DC, and that's quite a lot of population. You're basically going against them if you say, well, recreational is off the table now, we will go after recreational. That's going to be a problem already. So let's pump the brakes on thinking that this guy's sole purpose, like Trump just put him in there to be like, okay, we need an attorney general that's going to crack down on marijuana. And Sessions is like, hey, I'm your guy, let's do this. And on day 1, he goes in there and starts telling attorneys to prosecute marijuana cases again, which they aren't allowed to do, federal attorneys. He would have to go tell people that the Ogden letter no longer applies, which was a letter that Obama and Eric Holder both wrote or signed, or both, that basically said lay off, federal enforcers like the DEA and other law enforcement like FBI and just federal agencies that enforce laws in general, just to lay off marijuana in states where it's legal because of the states. And so yeah, the recreational is another issue. It's a big issue. But if you combine all 3, the decriminalized with the medical marijuana and the recreational, you have a serious problem here, because that's most of the country has some form of legal marijuana access in their state. or decriminalization at the very least. And then there's the people that haven't done anything. So they have bills in motion. I'll get into that in another video, but there are 3 states on the East Coast that are talking about legislatively legalizing marijuana in 2017. So again, if Sessions comes out hard against marijuana, he's going to have a tough battle against actual people. Who knows with the Democrats, whether they'll roll over and just accept whatever, because they haven't really been on the side of legalizing marijuana as much as just grassroots efforts in general. You don't see the Democratic Party or candidates in the Democratic Party come out in full legalization mode. It's been a long time since I've seen any of them, except for Bernie Sanders, who was actually an independent candidate before running for president. And he had that position before he became a Democrat and ran for president. So basically, a lot of fear around this pick that Trump did. He's been called a hardline drug policy reform opponent, and we've heard a lot of quotes from him over the years as marijuana legalization has spread and become more acceptable. We'll read a few things out of this article from I forget where I get this, but you know what? Yeah. This is the story of the day. If you haven't noticed, this is the story that's taking the wire by storm. You literally can't open up a web news or turn on the TV without somebody somewhere during the day. You're going to find this story, and everybody's writing about it. And so that kind of gives you an idea that it is a little serious. So I don't watch like regular news on TV like CNN and stuff like that. So I might not, actually know what they're talking about. But I know they've done stories, and I've seen video clips available and actual written stories available from mainstream outlets, every one of them. Oh yeah, this one came from the HuffPost, I believe. Speaking of that. So anyway, as marijuana remains illegal under Controlled Substances Act, despite the expansion of recreational programs in Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, Alaska, Washington, D.C., 4 new states approve legalization on election day, and 29 states total now have legalized marijuana for medical purposes. The movement has only been able to press forward because of guidance urging federal prosecutors to refrain from targeting state legal marijuana options, as I mentioned earlier with the letters from Obama and Eric Holder. Now, Eric Holder is the current Attorney General. Well, no, he's not the current Attorney General. Sorry, he was the Attorney General at the beginning of Obama's. He's who Obama picked at the beginning. And now, you heard a lot of people like, whoa, people on the right was pretty set aback when Eric Holder was picked. I don't know why, because Eric Holder, before picked, he was a lawyer that got people out of trouble, that was in trouble, and who worked for Wall Street. So you can guess why Obama picked him. Now this guidance, these letters that I'm talking about, and this other stuff where Obama, well, there's another element to this, is also under Obama, all the Bush era attorneys, the district attorneys for the U.S. justice system all over the country were like cleansed of the hardline prohibitionist judges and lawyers that make cases and stuff. So, who knows who they got replaced with, whether they were corporate loyalists, or whether they might be good for the people and might not go along with this if Sessions decides to go hardline. So now we have John Hudak, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, who writes extensively on marijuana policy, says that Jeff Sessions should scare every regulator, government official, cannabis industry operator, patient, and consumer across the country. That's some pretty harsh words. Sessions could reverse federal guidance allowing state marijuana programs with the stroke of a pen, he said. That's true. Will he do it? He could also use the FBI to crack down on marijuana operations nationwide and use the DEA to enforce federal prohibition outside the jurisdiction of the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court. The court had ruled in August that a federal rider blocks federal officials from prosecuting state legal marijuana operators and patients. Again, that rider could be ridden right out. The rider that the Ninth Circuit affirmed must be reapproved each year and Sessions could order DEA enforcement nationwide if it were allowed to expire. So that's a pretty scary one there, too. He could also file lawsuits that seek to shut down state and local governments enforcing marijuana reforms and administrating regulatory programs. In essence, he would basically be instantly saying that all these people are criminal enterprises operating criminal, they're criminal operators operating criminal enterprises. And all he could do, he could undo much of what has become the Obama doctrine with regard to marijuana policy in the United States. That policy reversal is the worst case scenario for the marijuana industry. Now that's true. Obama does get a lot of credit just for the hands-off approach. But this hands-off approach was petitioned for all through the 90s when George W. was using the DEA to bust dispensaries in California after medical marijuana was legalized there. And I mean, it was happening under Bill Clinton too, and that's when really the protests started. It wasn't just a George W. Bush thing. I got to spread the blame around to where it all falls. And the raids only increased under Bush, even after there was like a moratorium on them when they said, okay, we're only going to have this many dispensaries in LA County. And then the DEA was like, okay, if you're limited to that, we won't raid you. It was kind of like a word of, trust me on my word. And of course, they went back on that. So here we have some more quotes. Jeff Sessions, in all, he could undo much of what became, that was still his quote, advocates for the drug policy reform have blasted Trump for selecting Sessions. Donald Trump's decision heralds a return to the worst days of the drug war, said Bill Piper, senior director for the National Affairs at Drug Policy Alliance, a drug policy reform group. Jeff Sessions is a drug war dinosaur, which is the last thing the nation needs now, says Ethan Nadelman, DPA's executive director. Those who counted on Donald Trump's reassurance that marijuana reforms should be a state's issue will be sorely disappointed. Trump has said he would respect states' rights on the issue, but Sessions' track record of opposing marijuana reform is deeply troubling to people who's in favor of progressive drug laws. During a Senate hearing earlier this year, Sessions spoke out against marijuana and urged the federal government to send the message to the public that good people don't smoke marijuana. He went on to say, we need grown-ups in Washington to say that marijuana is not the kind of thing that ought to be legalized. That's pretty scary there. And then he blasted Obama's stance on the issue and called legalization of marijuana a mistake last year. And I think what he said about Obama was right along the lines of the leadership thing and how he's sending the wrong message to the youth or some crap. Who cares? Because here's some rhetoric from 1986 when Sessions had been nominated to be a federal judge. A former assistant U.S. attorney accused him of saying that he thought the Ku Klux Klan was acceptable until he found out members smoked marijuana. Sessions allegedly made the statements in connection with the prosecution of a Klan member who had hanged a black man. So Sessions basically said, oh yeah, the KKK, they're pretty cool. And then someone was like, oh yeah, well they don't care if their members smoke marijuana. And then he was like, oh, well then, no, that's a deal breaker then. And he's talking casually over, cocktails after, being in court all day, prosecuting a Klan member who had hanged a black man. Unbelievable, man. So despite Sessions' retrograde views on the plant, the trend of state-level legalization reflects a broader cultural shift towards the acceptance of marijuana, the most commonly used illicit substance in the United States, world. National support for the legalization of marijuana has risen dramatically in recent years, reaching historic highs in multiple polls just last month, like 60 and even 64% in national polls by reputable pollsters. And, Colorado having established a regulated marijuana marketplace and successes that have debunked lawmakers and law enforcers' prediction on such policies that they said that this is all going to be a disaster. And they still say, oh, all the bad things that's happening in Colorado. No one can really say all the bad things that's happening in Colorado because nothing bad's happening in Colorado. And although many drug policy reformers are disappointed in the Sessions pick, some are holding out hope that they'll be able to preserve should he be confirmed. Or persevere. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. In case you haven't noticed, I've been gone like for a while, and that's because I've been working extra hard to catch everything up and make sure I'm all caught up around the farm. So that's it. I'm back. I'm just like catching up my brain now. But yeah, there's so many news stories coming out lately. I still can't just jump in and start talking about the new laws. I'm gonna let the stories come out and then we'll talk about it as they happen. But this isn't a good thing. I'm not gonna hold up. Let's see a couple more quotes. While the choice certainly isn't good news for marijuana reform, I'm still hopeful the new administration will realize that any crackdown against broadly popular laws in a growing number of states would create huge political problems that they don't need and will use lots of political capital they'd be better off spending on issues the new president cares a lot more about, said Tom Angel, chairman of Marijuana Majority. Now, I read him a lot because he's a great writer and a great activist. And Marijuana Majority is an awesome concept. Anyway, so yeah, what he just said is crazily true. You can't just start going in there and be like, okay, boom, scrap the Ogden letter, scrap, the fact that I said that the federal government's not going to get involved in states that have legalized states' rights. Forget that Trump said states' rights. We're just going to throw all that out the book, and we're going to say FBI, DEA, local police, go to town, shut it down. In order to do that, you'd have to have a lot of balls because you're going to have people in the streets protesting everywhere, every day after that. And you're not going to get anybody that you know reelected. It's going to be the last time you ever had that party hold any office anywhere, period. So we have Mason Tervet. He's the guy that basically got Colorado legalized and maybe even California. But he's the communications director at Marijuana Policy Project, and he says he expects appointees who serve at the pleasure of the president to stick to the president's position. It would certainly be controversial if Senator Sessions completely defied the president who appointed him, he said. And then Representative Earl Blumenauer, a Democrat from Oregon who has been at the forefront of efforts to reform marijuana laws at the federal level, called Sessions potentially helming the nation's justice system deeply disturbing, considering his opposition to reform on issues like criminal justice, immigration, and marijuana. Quote, I am hopeful that the next administration, regardless of the Attorney General's personal feelings, will respect the 10th Amendment and states' rights to set their own policy in regards to cannabis, Blumenauer said, calling on the Senate to reject Sessions' nomination. There's a bold move. Now, he's coming from the angle that it ain't just marijuana. And marijuana is part of the broader picture of criminal justice reform. But this guy's got skeletons in his closet, and he's got like all kinds of weird positions on the most important topics of our time. What are we doing? And I think he can probably find a few other people that would support him in this rejection of the nomination. And I don't think it would be that hard to get this nomination blocked, to be honest. But then again, the Democrats are spineless. They don't ever try to do anything to oppose the Republicans. And if you don't believe me, just keep watching. You'll see. Representative Dana Rarabacher, Republican from California, a leading conservative voice on marijuana policy reform, told the Huffington Post that people shouldn't be concerned about Sessions interfering with state marijuana policies as long as Trump upholds his campaign promise, the one of states' rights. And he basically said that he liked medical marijuana and that recreational might be a problem. We'll watch Colorado, but for the most part, state right. All right. Quote, the President of the United States will be making that decision, and Trump has publicly stated during the election that he was in favor of letting the states make the decision on this policy, Rarabacher said. Jeff Sessions is a loyal man with integrity. He will do what his bosses wants him to do. Well, we can only hope. We can only hope there. There's nothing you can do but hope on that. Campaign promises, yeah, a lot of people are hoping Trump keeps a lot of his campaign promises. I'm not one of them. All right, but there is a couple things that he said during the campaign that I do think if he actually stuck to it, that would be great. Well, he didn't drain the swamp. He hired the crocodiles and alligators. He didn't, appoint anything but crocodiles and alligators so far. He's talking about the TPP in the primaries, but who knows what it'll really do when he's in. And many other things, the things that he talked about that might have sounded like he was to help the working people, like he wanted to look at NAFTA and maybe repeal NAFTA. Hey, we're waiting for it here in the Rust Belt. But anyway, no one expects Trump to keep any of his promises, from building a wall to whatever else, letting states have their rights, on marijuana. If you believe that this guy even remembers what his promises were or what his position was on any issue, you got to be kidding yourself, because he's just not that guy. When it comes down to it, they probably never even discuss marijuana, and I agree with that too. The only question is how much will be allowed and to what extent, and will he harm the industry? Now that's another thing, is the industry's already operating on a wounded, leg, just kind of limping around because the banks won't do business with us. So we can't get loans, we can't get tax ID numbers, we can't operate like a normal business because of that. So, it wouldn't take much more to whack the wounded and knock us right into, total crippledness, or back into operating illegally in black market. But for the most part, I wouldn't worry about it. You know what I mean? And worrying doesn't help anything anyway. So what you do is what you think to yourself, what can I do about it? Well, I'll tell you one thing that we're going to do about it is we're going to contact the DEA and get comments to the DEA on marijuana, because it's very important that we show in numbers that marijuana has to be taken off of the Controlled Substances Act. That's one thing. And then while doing that, we can contact our local representatives and tell them to get on board with this taking it right off schedule idea. What's another thing we can do? Well, since you put an ugly face like Sessions on this position and made it obvious that this guy, if he does something, everybody's going to freak out, because they're like, no, this is this crazy right-wing Republican guy. He's going to take away our marijuana. Well, that's when people will stand up and fight it. Now, when you got the Obama and the neoliberals under control, it's like status quo, status quo, status quo. Let's see how long we can hold out, because people are going to legalize on their own eventually. So as the president, I don't have to push for it. I don't have to ruin my legacy by being the guy that legalized marijuana or whatever they say. I mean, Obama completely left the marijuana constituency in the dust after 2008, and he didn't even really use that much then. We found out about what he did when he was in college or high school or whatever, and whatever. It's no one asks the stupid question, did you inhale anymore? No one cares anymore. It's not even a thing. So I don't see why Obama don't act more on it. Now we'll talk about the clemency reports on the clemency report when I finally get around to it. He's still got a few days to go, guys. I mean, he's not done yet, hopefully. I mean, there is a final clemency report, but he might still be able to let some more people out at the last second. They always do, so, it's in the dead of night, and no one knows what's going on, and it just happens. And that's the way presidents have always done it. So Sessions, Trump, yeah, he's terrible. So far, the worst thing I think is about him is that he said that no good people smoke marijuana. That's just absolutely crazy. And then, of course, the racist statement that the Ku Klux Klan is just fine. Oh, wait, they smoke marijuana? Maybe not. And right in front of him is a guy getting prosecuted for hanging another man just because he was black. So, yeah, Ku Klux Klan, they're great. Oh, they smoke weed? No, they're not. So Jeff Sessions is a piece of shit. Straight up. He don't deserve to be in any fucking office. Kick him out, man. Don't even, Democrats, grow some balls. You just let the corporate elites like Hillary Clinton come in and take over your party over the last 8 years. We've lost all the governorships to Republicans. The Republicans have majorities everywhere, all over the country, from coast to coast. All the cities and all the governor mansions, all the representatives that you send to Washington. Now once they get in there, then they gerrymander themselves in, and basically what we're getting to the point of is the country isn't being represented by the majority feel. Like, the majority of the country wants marijuana to be legal, period. None of this bullshit where, you know, there's the cops are whining because they don't have enough work to do because they don't have enough marijuana busts to make. Marijuana arrests are out of style, guys. You haven't figured that out yet, man. Just start tuning in. We'll tell you more about it. But anyway, I'm sure that's probably already half of my audience is the cops. But whatever, you know. We're just out here trying to tell you what's going on. And one thing's for sure, Jeff Sessions is not the people's choice for the Attorney General's position.